Backyard chicken keeping may elicit mental images of a cute chicken coop with chickens gathered around it clucking in the pristine green grass. However, this may or may not be an accurate picture. And that's what we will discuss today, whether real life looks like this. And then hopefully you will be much more informed by the end of our talk. Hi, I'm Edith Tabler from TME Farms, and chickens appear to be part of my destiny from the time I was very young. My mom has pictures of me running around in the chicken pen from the time I could walk. And currently, I still have chickens on my farm, and today I farm with my husband and 3 children at Roseland, Alberta.
I'm Jael, and I'm also happy to be here today, and I enjoy chickens like my mother, so they are the favorite part of what we do on our farm.
And as you contemplate chickens, you will probably have a choice to make. Will it be laying hens or will it be meat chickens? Will I have them year-round or do I want a seasonal project? And the answers to your questions will determine which direction you take things. So our focus today will be on laying hens and meat chickens, realizing there's many other types of poultry and fowl that people have and enjoy, but we will just focus on this. Otherwise, we would be here until this after lunch today.
And I'm gonna do the presenting on laying hens, which are my favorite. I far prefer them over the meat chickens. I'm gonna start by saying that if you choose to get your laying hens as chicks, you need to take good care of them. The way you brood them will carry throughout their entire life. So you should follow the instructions you have with your chicks when you're brooding. We'll talk more about that later. But I just want to say that when they're chicks, you set them up for their entire life. Once you're a little more experienced, you might want to try incubating your own chicks. It's a really fun project, and it's the best way to get some really tame chicks because they can hear before they're hatched, so they'll recognize you, or your voice anyways. Now, which chickens do you want? Whether you hatch them yourself, buy them as growing birds or started birds, or maybe as day-olds. So you have to choose the traits you want when you're choosing your breed of laying hens. Do you want a chicken that will be super friendly and live a long time, hopefully, or do you want one that will give you 300 eggs in a year? Well, I prefer heritage hens, so that is my bias. They are the cute ones, and some of them lay the colorful eggs, and they're really good, tame little birds. And they lay for longer, so they will lay quite a few eggs in their life, probably close to what a more conventional modern breed will, but they spread it over a lot more years. I have a 6-year-old hen right now, and she will still lay the occasional egg. She's mostly just there because she's lived this long. And then we have another pen of more modern hybrid hens. They lay a lot more eggs. They allow us to have stable egg production throughout the year, but they all look the same, so naming them doesn't work. And now, letting hens outside. I love letting my hens outside because they love outside, and they will peck around and run around, and they get way stronger. If they're just in a barn, of course, they don't have as much room to move around, whereas outside they can run around and they can exhibit a lot. They can exhibit natural behaviors inside, but they can do it even better outside, especially heritage hens. And they get stronger from running around outside, as I think I already mentioned. And some people, I get lots of questions. Do they go inside at night, or will they just stay outside forever, never going inside? Will they go way far away from home and I'll never see them again? Well, you can make an enclosure for them, which we'll talk about later. Or you can just, if you don't, which is kind of risky, but okay, we will in the spring let them out a bit without a fence of any sort, and they will stay fairly close to home. They'll range a little ways, and they always come back at night. That's the good thing. Twilight signals them, and if you go out shortly before dark, they will all be in the barn waiting for you to close the door. Unless you have a sick one or something, but that's unusual. When they're outside, they will forage, especially the heritage hens. And this reduces feed consumption by a ton. And I can't guarantee that everyone will have the same results. But this winter, I was carrying a pail of feed a day, of the size of pail shown on the slide. And then I started letting the hens out, and they could pick around and find things to eat, bugs and insects and things. And now I'm carrying only 2 pails a week. So that's pretty good. It saves a lot of money on feed. And it adds health to the hens because they're eating, because the insects are good for them. And that's what creates the deep yellow yolks that some people really want their eggs to have. And it reduces the number of flies in your yard because they eat them, and the larvae. And so, as I already mentioned, foraging is one of the superpowers of a heritage hen. They will do it all day long. They'll go out as soon as you open the door, and if it's light, they'll go out and they'll forage right until twilight. And it's really cool to see as they all do this and pick up things from the soil. And if you have a garden, they really like that too. But you might not like it if they have gone through your lettuce. And now on to roosters. Having a rooster is something I really enjoy. They will strut around, they'll crow, and they can be really amusing. And they always think they are so important. But this doesn't mean some people are scared of roosters. Of course, there's always a bad apple in every bunch. But I've had pretty good luck with my roosters. And this guy here on the slide, he is a rooster. And he is my oldest pet chicken. And I can still carry him around. And he has spurs. They're about, 3-4 inches long. And we've never done anything about them. And he is not nasty or mean. And I really love him. But so they are not nasty. Not always. And they will protect the hens. They will signal the hens. They have a danger call. So if aerial predators or terrestrial predators, they will signal hens and keep them all safe, which is, of course, a good thing because you don't want to lose any of your hens. And now you see, this is our basic barn setup. And your setup is really important. If you have a bad setup, you're not going to like your hens, or at least that's the way it usually works out. And an important thing about a setup is that you can go in with them every single day. Because if you don't go in with them, especially if you have a rooster, he'll begin to think he rules the world, or at least his barn, and you'll be left not the ruler. So when you go in, they won't be tame, they'll flap up to the ceiling. It's just not nice. And so having a good setup with nests and roosts and feeders is important. And so here you can see my nests that I have currently. And this reduces floor eggs because the floor eggs are often dirtier, and you can keep nests clean easier than the floor of a barn. And there are multiple styles. If you Google, you'll see there are tons of great ideas for nest building. But it's important to put up your nests well before you think your hens will start laying, because then they can explore them and see what it's all about. And then when they start laying, they'll know that that's a safe place to seek out. And if you don't put the nests in before they start laying, you will notice that they take a while to transition there, if they ever fully do. And then now you can see our roosts on the slide. And here they're nice and new, which is, of course, really nice. This is a safe place for them to go at night. And not all our hens will fit on these, but they crowd on there. There is not space for one more chicken at night. It's another behavior that they exhibit, which is natural. I don't have to teach them to use a roost or a nest. And here we have our final product, which it's a good part of the reason why I have hens. And just a note about the colors. You see here, there's some green eggs, some brown eggs, some speckled eggs. The green ones all come from heritage hens. We have some Americana influence in our flock, so that gives us a lot of that. And so we keep the heritage for the color, and then the more conventional modern breeds, they usually lay a brown or white and are very steady that way. They will give you a carton full of the same colored eggs. But the heritage ones, they vary a bit depending on what they're doing. And size-wise, each fall the hens molt, meaning they lose their feathers and then they'll grow them back. And each time they do that, their eggs size up. So when you have really young hens, you have tiny eggs when they start laying. And then, for example, my 6-year-old hen, her eggs are huge. I can't imagine how they're so big, but they are.
Thank you, Jael. That was well done and informative. And I will now move to talking about meat birds, which is an entirely different world than laying hens. And my presentation will just be a primer on the topic. I've done it for about 20 years, raising a flock of meat birds. And every year I learn something new, something I could have done differently, and future notes to myself. And usually it involves tuition in some form or another. It's never without cost learning. But it's worth it because we have excellent chicken for our freezer in the final end and high quality chicken to offer to our meat customers as well. So there's 2 basic type of meat birds available. There's a foraging type and the standard white Cornish giant that many of us are familiar with. And that is more akin to the variety that we find in the grocery store. I will focus on the Cornish giants as that's where the bulk of my experience is, but I do know the foraging variety take longer to finish. You can expect 12 to 15 weeks to finish versus the 8 to 10 for a standard Cornish giant. So it usually starts with a day-old chick that arrives at your farm in a box from the hatchery. There's various hatcheries. There's small ones, family, there's a few small ones. However, the hatching industry is controlled largely by bigger players, and those of us with small holdings have very few options for sourcing our meat birds, as we don't have access to the same hatcheries that a large commercial chicken barn would do. So they arrive on the farm with their yolk sac inside their body at this point, and that sustains them for approximately 72 hours before they absolutely need food and water. But it's still a good idea to have them on food and water as soon as they arrive. So I spend quite a bit of time dedicated to creating the perfect environment to brood these tiny babies, as they are I always find a bit of a miracle that they emerge from the shell to begin with, and that they are fully independent in the sense of food and water from the moment they're hatched. But they do need some tender care. I would recommend that you set up a small space, depending on the size of flock, that is temperature controlled for about a week before they arrive. And read the information from your hatchery carefully and follow the instructions temperature-wise. They cannot tolerate 5-degree temperature swings. They can possibly be a degree or 2 warmer in the environment you set up for them, but please don't have them 3 degrees cooler. They will not do well. And your hatchery always has excellent information. So what I focus on is having a warm, draft-free environment. And usually when we're a small holding, we don't have a dedicated barn that we can heat to that approximately 32 degrees Celsius that's draft-free. So therefore, I will create a smaller enclosure inside my barn that has a roof, but a permeable roof. So frost fabric, cardboard, something that still breathes, but prevents drafts from coming down on my chicks. And here is this picture shows that of happy chicks under a heat lamp, and temperature is king. Next, we will move to feed. And I highly recommend a commercial grade chick starter that is in a crumble form so that every bite gives them all the nutrition they need. These Cornish giants are modern genetics that require precise conditions to grow optimally. So every bite matters right from the start, because you are taking them from these chicks that are maybe 100 grams to something live weight will be about 5 to 6 kilograms by 9 to 10 weeks, depending on your conditions. So as you think, well, how much feed will I need? What will this cost me? Is it even cost effective? No, it probably is not cost effective, I'll be honest. You can buy your chicken cheaper at the local grocery store. However, you won't have had the pleasure of growing it yourself. You don't know what conditions those birds lived in, and you really don't know what they ate. And so I still recommend growing your own chicken. The flavor is beyond compare. And I like that my animals were grown in an environment that I know was humane and that they were well looked after while they were here. So you need to budget on about 2.5 kilograms of starter feed. That'll take them to 4 to 5 weeks. I know the hatchery recommends that you feed starter feed to 6 weeks. I've done this. However, they grow so quickly that you start having heart attacks by 6 weeks if you feed them this rich starter feed to that point. And I think the meat is a little better if you can slow down their growth just a little bit. So if you feed them starter feed until about 4 to 5 weeks, they still gain all the benefit of high quality feed. And then I switch them to a grower finisher, whether a commercial one. And because I usually have enough birds, I do a custom ration from a mill. And you can also farm source your grains, but do your research. I have not had a great deal of success with farm rolled grains for my meat birds. Works great for laying hens. Meat birds, on the other hand, it's been a challenge. So now you have fed approximately 2.5 kilograms of chick starter to your chick, and now you move them to the grower finisher, and you can budget about 10 kilograms per bird to finish them at about 9 weeks. And what age you take them to depends what size you want in the final end. I find 9 to 10 weeks gives me that 5.5 to 6 pound carcass that comes back from the butcher. And as a side note, if you haven't booked your butcher yet, please do. Butcher capacity is very limited in Alberta, and you need to book this. I usually book it at the same time I order my chicks. 2 to 3 month lead time should get you a butcher slot. If you plan to butcher yourself, well then this doesn't matter. So the next consideration is water. And with meat birds, water is actually a really big deal. They drink a lot. They need to drink a lot. They are gaining weight extremely quickly. So aim for good quality water, non-chlorinated, and kind of have an idea of your salt content, because some farm wells have a lot of salt, and then it would be wise to modify your feed ration so that you reduce the salt intake somewhat. And make sure it's clean. So this picture shows a standard chick waterer that you can just dump out and put clean water in every day. And I will change the water every 12 hours in this type of setup, and I will just dump out the water in the tray every 4 to 6 because it gets really dirty. And the quality of your meat is affected by the cleanliness of the feed, the water, and their general environment. And this next slide shows a different type of water system. And these are water lines fed automatically, so the water is always clean. The chicks like it. There's little silver nipples they can pick at, and it's really my favorite way of watering birds, particularly meat chickens, because of the cleanliness angle. And now you're probably 24 hours in, and when I was new, I was like, now how do I know that that everything is good in their environment? Through time, I've picked up several clues. One is pick up a chick, set it on your hand. If their feet are nice and warm, you know that their temperature is fine. And if it's fairly quiet when you walk in and you didn't slam the door or anything, they won't startle. And it should be pretty much quiet. If there's a lot of loud cheeping going on, something is wrong. Then take a good look around. Temperature, drafts, feed, water. And then you have the occasional chick that will cheep loudly because not all the chicks are viable at hatch, but the hatchery doesn't necessarily know that. And so at about the 3 to 4 day mark, when the yolk has totally run out, you have what's commonly called the die-off day, where if there are non-viable chicks, this is the day they will die. But you don't want very many. You might want at most 1%. So in a small flock, you may well have 0 deaths. But in years when I've had 500 or so, then you can expect at least 5 to 10 chicks that will die during this time period. But if more than that start dying, you need to, again, take a good look. Why? Because deaths happen quickly, and it doesn't take long for your flock to not be nearly the size that it was when you first got them. Your chicks are beautifully situated. At least you think they are beautifully situated. It all looks good. They're contentedly sitting around. Some are eating, some are drinking, some are sleeping, some have their heads tucked under their wings. That's the scenario you want. Occasionally, you go in and it just isn't like that. Nobody is at peace. There's loud chirping, which is a really good clue. You need to investigate your setup. And if you aren't sure where to start, go barefoot. Take off your socks, roll up your pants, and stand in the pen on clean shavings or a clean piece of cardboard if it's already a little dirtier in there, and see what's happening with your ankles. Ankles are very temperature sensitive. And if you have a draft on your ankles, you know your chicks are living in a draft. Then it's time to look around and see what's going on. Maybe cover up a window that's partially open. Maybe put in a false roof over your brooding setup if you haven't already done so. Frost fabric is my material of choice because it keeps drafts out and yet lets moisture escape. You do not want moisture in with your baby chicks, not excessive amount anyway. And once you've rectified any issues, then you can enjoy them. And last year, we stuck our phone in to take some pictures at chick level, and they were fascinated by the lights, maybe the movement on the screen, and we dubbed the picture Cornish Giants Join the Selfie Age. So it's good to have some fun with your project. And then comes the next stage, teenagehood. I don't have a picture of it because it's just not noteworthy. They are ugly. You're kind of pondering why they look the way they do, but actually they're feathering in, and it's all natural and the way it should be. Then they come to this fully feathered stage where you can actually let them outside, because until they have feathers, it's not good for them to be outside. They get chilled too easily, the sun affects them too much, and in general, could be setting yourself up for additional problems. But here is a contented older teenager grazing in the grass, looking for bugs more likely. They eat the grass, but it doesn't provide a great deal of nutritional content for them. The insects and the worms and all that is what they're truly growing from. Then they grow some more and they're almost ready for freezer camp. This next picture shows birds that are quite close to being ready to butcher and probably only need about another week and a half, 2 weeks. And at this stage, they again become vulnerable. They're big, they're clumsy, and you just need to watch over them that they don't flip upside down because they can't right themselves anymore. They might sit down in the sun and not realize it's not healthy for them to sit in the sun for hours at a time. So provide deep shade for them, provide huts, different things to keep them well sheltered and looked after. And then this next picture shows the setup we have used when they're more out on an open pasture situation where they have no access to trees. And these huts do a good job of providing shade. There's usually a bit of a breeze moving through them if you have them elevated off the ground a bit. And it provides excellent shelter. And you can hang up water lines in there. You can hang feeders in these huts so that they are never far away from food and water, which is very critical for continuous growth. You don't want your Cornish giants to not have access to feed and water for any extended number of hours, or it shuts down their digestive tract, and then you're more susceptible to disease and bacteria taking over that you don't want to gain the upper hand. Now you're at the end of your first cycle of meat birds. You had them for anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks, and you will evaluate and decide what you will do next time, differently, the same, and maybe even try a new species like turkeys, which are difficult to brood. And brooding, which I realized I hadn't explained earlier in my presentation, is this period where the chick is a baby, or the poult in the case of a turkey. And brooding simply means that you are providing warmth and shelter for them that's appropriate for their life stage until they can thermoregulate their own body, which is to maintain a steady body temperature without the help of heaters, heat lamps, and such a controlled environment. So in the case of Cornish giants, it's usually about 2 weeks that this stage is quite intense. Turkeys is slightly longer, 3 to 4 weeks, where you need to temperature control for them. And turkeys in the brooding stage forget to eat. Their self-preservation skills are poor. So if you put a chick or two in with them, that keeps them stirred up and they continue eating and drinking. And they're easily stressed, so you want to try and do your very best with your turkey setup. And the end game with all of this is a plump carcass for Thanksgiving in the case of a turkey. And in the case of chickens, there's many things that you can do with chickens. You can have them whole, like this rotisserie chicken I did. You can cut them in pieces and debone and create your own skinless, boneless breasts and thighs and legs to use in a variety of recipes all through the winter. Now, moving on, I'm going to talk a few technical details surrounding the raising of backyard meat birds. And water is the first consideration. And Cornish giants take a tremendous amount of water, especially in the latter stages of their life. And you can expect that a group of 100 birds will easily drink 15 to 20 gallons of water per day at the height of their growing period. So that's quite a lot of water carrying, especially on a hot day because the water disappears incredibly quickly. So what I much prefer to a standard manual water is the water lines I previously discussed for chicks. Here I will discuss a bit more of the setup. Well, how we operate these chicken water lines is having a 5-gallon bucket in the corner of our barn, and we have a float in there. We attach a garden hose that's hooked up to a faucet, and it refills that 5-gallon bucket continuously. And then gravity feeds into the chicken water lines, resulting in continuous clean water, which is a really big deal. It affects your meat quality and the health of your birds in general. And the next picture just is a close-up of a chicken drinking from one of these nipples, and they're very adept at it. No training required if you have the water lines in there from the time that they're young chicks. The next picture is just a more basic setup. If you have a few birds, this is very straightforward, hassle-free. You don't have to worry about water lines breaking or floats failing and floods happening. And floods are a lot of work. Don't ask me how I know. And these waterers will do the trick, especially if you're under 25 birds or so. It's super easy. And this particular picture has a heated base under it for our laying hens who we keep year round. And this way their water doesn't freeze in the wintertime if the building drops in temperature. And again, for good egg production, you need a steady source of clean water. The next piece is feed and feed storage. Now feed, there's a lot of permutations available. You can go conventional versus organic, soy-free, corn-free. You can purchase from your local farm supply store or a local feed mill if you have access to one. And also you can access local farmers. Particularly for laying hens, they do well on coarse grains. Just make sure it's nutritionally balanced. And most feed mills have a nutritionist on staff that is more than willing to assist people in providing the right diet for their bird. And birds need different amounts of energy and protein depending on the species and their purpose. And this is a big topic that I will not delve into. We'd be here for a long time, and I don't know enough about it to truly give an in-depth presentation. And so, if you're sourcing grain from a local farmer, it won't look like store-bought feed because store-bought feed usually is pelleted or crumbled. It's a process of cooking the feed and forming a kind of all-in-one. Every bite has all the nutrition you need, whereas home-ground grains, birds tend to pick through them more, and some like one thing, some like another. Then feed storage. You spend quite a lot of money on feed, and all kinds of species would like access to your feed. Birds, rodents, even your pets might want it because it does smell quite tasty when you're an animal. So we store all our feed in these small hopper bottom bins with pail spouts on them, which makes it very easy for us to feed. It's straightforward. But if this isn't an option for you, find some other way to keep animals out of your animal feed. And storing bags of feed, you can dump them in a tote, store them on a pallet if rodents don't have access, but please don't store them right on the concrete as moisture wicks up the bag, and I have seen moldy bags of feed that you end up throwing out. Mold and animals do not mix. You will have sick animals. And then the next piece to having a healthy flock that's there when you go outside in the morning is controlling and understanding the predators in your environment. And so in our case, we worry about the canines, the dogs, the foxes, the coyotes, the members of the cat family, like cats and skunks, ravens, which are a member of the COVID family, and of course the raptors, owls, hawks, eagles. And these are all interested in what you are doing with your animals, and they patrol much more carefully than you think. For instance, one time I had no idea that foxes traveled right past my pig pens. And I was outside late at night watching a sow farrow, and lo and behold, there's a fox 10 feet away trotting past the pen. And I had no idea this was going on until I was out there at night. So I was much more concerned about predation after that, and to understand how it actually works, because I try and create an ecosystem on our farm where all the pieces work together without intensive human management at all times. And so after this illuminating visit from the fox, I tried to understand their behavior a bit more. And in the case of coyotes, which I knew were close at all times, they actually are a territorial animal. And I try and keep them undisturbed in my territory, but deter them from coming to the yard, because a new coyote has to be trained how we do things. So I would rather that the coyotes know how things work on my yard. So now that you understand your predators, who's there, and what their behavior is, and if you don't, come to some understanding, the goal that I work quite hard towards is preventing that first predation event. A predator that has had success becomes very brave and very bold. And these electric nets are crucial to preventing that first predation event, particularly from dogs, cats, skunks, all terrestrial type predators, because each strand is electrified, it goes right to the ground. Even digging isn't a comfortable experience, especially in nice wet grass. I've had cats literally leap backwards like a cartoon cat from these things when they would try and access the chickens. And I imagine the other mammals are very similar. And so I string these around all my birds. And we have an extensive electric fence network on our farm. And the nets are part of that, but we power many thousands of feet with one fencer. Again, do some fencer research. I'm willing to talk to you about this. It's something that I'm quite passionate about, is electric fences, and that they're set up well. They work well when they're set up properly. Work very poorly if they're not grounded and you don't understand what type of fencer you need to power the type of fence you have. And then we'll move on to aerial predators. And there you need cover. Your birds need cover, because if you have a rooster doing his job, he will make the alarm call and the hens will scurry for cover, whether it's underneath a shed, in a bush, and even the Cornish giants will learn to cue in to that rooster, because I have my Cornish giants running in a separate pen from the laying hens, but in close proximity, and they hear that rooster and boy, they head for cover, because hawks, eagles, etc. all depend on birds that aren't aware that they are there. And so this covers basics of brooding, those first 2 weeks of life, and feed, water, predation, which are some of the main pieces to an outside chicken environment. There are other things that need to be considered, but you will gain those skills as you go. And I hope you have a very successful season and wish you every bit of good luck in raising eggs and meat for your family.